So welcome everyone. My name is Rabbi Zach Kamenetz. I'm the CEO and founder of Shefa, the world's first organization dedicated to Jewish psychedelic support. Shefa creates powerful pathways to the heart of Jewish wisdom, practice, and community, inspired by the contemporary psychedelic renaissance. We envision a world where religious traditions and psychedelic states mutually inform, enrich, and deepen one another to re-enchant spiritual life. Just a little bit about what to expect from this conversation. We will be speaking today with Harav, Dr. Aharon Cherniak, about his work in Jewish psychedelic narratives, and with research as well about attachment theory and religious and spiritual practice and tradition. Once more, we will be speaking to record for the podcast and for our YouTube, and then we will be ending that recording and opening up into questions from people who have been here. I'd like to introduce Rabbi Dr. Aharon Cherniak, a clinical psychologist in the Jerusalem Mental Health Center, a researcher affiliated with Stockholm University and Reichman University, and a rabbi. Aharon has conducted two discrete programs of research into, one, the intersection of spirituality and religion with mental health, and two, processes of change in psychotherapy, which influence his approach to studying psychedelics. He launched the Jewish Psychedelic Narrative Project to understand how psychedelic experiences are contextualized in individuals' lifelong personal stories and spiritual development with the aim of informing clinical intervention. Welcome, Aharon.
Yeah, thank you. The doctor is still in progress. But yeah, thank you very much.
That's right. We're almost there. You're almost there.
Yeah.
Well, welcome, Aharon. And like I said earlier, you have been one of the people that I've been in conversation longest with about these particular topics. So it's great to be able to open up this conversation to our wider audience and wider community. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, and I'll say also that our early conversations were very constructive in helping me chart the direction of my research. So I'm super glad to be here.
Thank you. So why don't you introduce yourself to people who are listening today, just talking about your rabbinic path and your motivation to enter into mental health research.
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, my journey into this field was, my original ambition was to be a sports journalist. And then at a certain point, it became important for me to understand what was, perhaps a more meaningful career path. And I started to get interested in the things that people find meaningful through my own journey. While through therapy or mental health, everyone wants to feel good and feel happy and have a flourishing life. Ultimately, most mental health interventions are based on the simple notion that people are happier and healthier when they're in touch with their values, things that they find meaningful, and that they take, strategic steps, committed steps to living those things out. I've been interested, as an undergraduate student, I was looking into how spirituality could be integrated into education or psychotherapy. And since then, I've been really interested in this topic, and also as a therapist, through my clinical work, there's a big gap between what we as clinicians often like to talk about, what we think is, the symptom or the solution. I remember a study a number of years ago showing that 25% of therapists thought that religion and spirituality was relevant to their treatment of their clients. And something like 70% of clients said that they wanted to bring up religion and spirituality in their therapy. So this ridiculous gap, for me, made it a priority to study this, scientifically and look into ways of, building clinical practice around, offering solutions for that gap. Yeah.
And would you say how did that also um, become supplemented by your rabbinic path? But you were
Oh,
doing all of this studying for mental health, but then also at the
yeah.
same time this intensive, immersive experience of becoming a Rav. So how did those two things ultimately
Well,
come together in your spirit?
the first thing I would note is that Halavai, you know, were it only the case that becoming a Rav, you know, demanded people to go through as rigorous a course of personal work as it does a rigorous course of study of ritual and law. But I would say that I wanted to for me personally, it was a dilemma for a long time whether to be a full-fledged rabbi or a full-fledged psychologist. And I think at the beginning you said something about a tangle of spirituality and science. And I don't know if I've ever felt like a description ever captured me so well. I think, I mean, we'll get into this perhaps, further on, but I think with psychedelics, one of the things that that I find so promising in the field of psychedelics is that people have experiences of what's meaningful or insights that they then have to work through. And so, for me along this journey of becoming a rabbi, psychologist, tangled mess of, iPhone headphone wires, there are a number of moments of insight or experience that I needed to work through understanding what I wanted to do, what I felt I was called to do, at a certain stage. And I don't feel like at one point I made a particular decision, but here I am, and
Mm.
that's yeah.
Well, do you want to share one of those moments where you felt like there was the working out of the
Sure,
negotiation? That sounds pretty interesting.
sure. Yeah, okay. Well, I don't want this to dominate our whole conversation, but we're we're coming up on 12 years since this is only I think this is my first time speaking publicly about this,
Hmm.
but about 12 years ago, I was in a week-long coma. Um, my wife and I had just started dating about 2 months prior, and she met my family while I was unconscious. Um, and at the time, I was an undergraduate student in a lab of positive psychology and education and psychotherapy. And I remember coming to. Oh, sorry. I remember coming to. Well, first of all, I went into the coma. My last memory was like Friday around noon. And then I woke up Friday around 4 p.m. And so, being told that it's Friday and, I thought only a couple of hours passed,
Hmm.
and then to realize that a whole week had passed. I remember thinking when I was still in a haze, that, not knowing yet if I would suffer any long-term brain damage, but praying and being grateful that, if God is kind enough, if God is good enough to give me back my, mental abilities to the extent that I have mental abilities, if he's giving me back my cognitive faculties, so I need to devote all of them to studying Torah, to teaching Torah, to being a rabbi. And so for me, so I finished my, obviously I'm skipping over a lot, but when I finished my bachelor's degree, my wife and I, we got married after that, we made Aliyah, we, moved to Israel. And after I finished rabbinical school and got into my clinical my master's in clinical psychology, I mean, that for me was I needed to do a lot of work to not feel like I was selling out, like I was abandoning I made a vow, I made a vow to teach Torah and spend my whole
Wow.
life learning and teaching Torah. And for me, today, I, I don't spend my whole life learning and teaching Torah, but I try to take a broader perspective in that, you know, the work that I'm doing is hopefully helping people live more effectively in pursuing their values. You know, whether it's Torah or what they consider meaningful. That, you know, I don't want to mince. That took a lot of personal work, a lot of therapy, you know, for me to you know, come to a more kinder understanding of myself and the decision to pursue this path. But ultimately, I feel like I am fulfilling the vow that I had made. But I mean, you know, you can give a little taste of why this field speaks to me, of, you know, having experiences of clarity, and the clarity, you know, on the one hand being very inspiring. You know, I was super excited to get my life handed back to me on a silver platter, you know, and that you know, made me grateful and still makes me grateful each and every breath I take. Um, but also creates a lot of tension. You know, how often in our lives do we feel like there's a tension between our values and our choices, right?
Mm.
And how much we wish that they would be more aligned.
Well, you know, it sounds like we could be talking about uh, your experiences with being in and out of a coma, and thank God you're well. But this, you know, these experiences that create what we would call something like ontological shock,
Yeah,
where there's some sort of non-negotiable that happens after the fact, peak experience, near-death experience, experiences with psychedelics. And it sounds like you had something that was deeply embodied, a non-ordinary state that caused a major shift in thought, feeling, and action. So maybe I just want to jump in then. Is that
yeah.
what inspired your interest to want to study psychedelics from a clinical perspective?
Well, yeah. I mean, what I mean, I've been, I guess, from my early stages of research were sort of superficial, looking at what do people believe religiously and do religiously, and what are their symptoms. And through my clinical training and my graduate research experience, I got more interested in the how things unfold over time. You know, um, psychology is not static, um, and especially with psychedelics make people um, have to confront things that perhaps they've been repressing or suppressing. Um, you know, to often in therapy and standard psychotherapy, there are so many barriers that people put up to avoid those things that they'd rather not encounter. I tell my clients that often my job is not to help them feel better, but to better feel. You know,
Mm,
to more flexibly be in touch with their, you know, various emotional states. You know, just today I was at a funeral, and at a funeral you don't want to be you want to be able to be in contact with pain and grief, because that's ultimately what's healthy. And you know, through psychedelics, people can be in touch with all types of memories or, you know, self-critical thoughts without the immediate emotional reactivity. Um, you know, and again, we'll get to talking about the experience, the psychedelic experience itself, but ultimately the work, you know, the clinical work with psychedelics is to work through the experience, you know, in the service of being able to work through tough things, you know,
mm.
in sober states, or you know, in non-altered states, in my opinion. I don't know if that's controversial or not, but
Well, let's maybe jump a little bit more specifically into your work now that we know something
yeah,
about you. So in
sure.
2021, you launched the Jewish Psychedelic Narratives Project. Would you talk about what the project is and what you're hoping to learn about Jewish psychedelic experience broadly or as specifically as you like?
Sure. Um, so, you know, I'm coming to this field having counseled patients in reconciling their religious experiences and beliefs and their symptoms, you know, whether it's OCD or depression or anything like that. And I'm starting to read the research that's coming, that the psychedelic research that's coming out, saying that psychedelics often, to the extent that they help therapeutically, it's through an experience that's religious or spiritual. Something like 80% of participants in clinical trials are saying this is one of the most memorable experiences of their lives, on the same level as getting married or having a child or losing a loved one, or something that's a milestone in their life that drives introspection and rich variety of emotions. And I remember thinking that I had something to contribute based on my tangled background, interdisciplinary background. That if people are labeling this experience as meaningful and transformational, that the studies need to look into, well, what is the reference point? What are people comparing these experiences to? What priors, right? What prior experiences are people bringing to their encounter with non-ordinary states of consciousness? And how are they, like, what personality traits are driving how people examine their experiences? In what ways are people incorporating their experiences or not incorporating their experiences into their life in the aftermath of the experience? I remember we had a conversation early on about both excitement and fear about how this field brings out things that are so personal, so embedded with spirituality, that could have a lot of benefits, right? Grounding people's healing experiences in things that are culturally, relevant and salient, can have, positive effects, making their clinical improvements more durable, more lasting, but also putting people, without the support. And this is why I'm so grateful that you're doing the work that you're doing. We're still developing the vessels to support people through these experiences. And people can come to, I don't want to say incorrect conclusions, because, what does it mean to be incorrect, but unhelpful, conclusions through their experience. I remember just this past week, I heard an interview with Rabbi Ben Noon saying that, people at the Golden Calf, people celebrating the Golden Calf also were having an elevated spiritual experience, right? So how do we, I'm sorry, that was a long-winded way of saying that tangled, the Jewish Psychedelic Narratives Project is sort of my effort of understanding the ways that the relationship between people and their lifelong journey of personal development, and these intense experiences that people are having, and how do we develop, cultural, spiritual competencies in psychotherapy that can help.
So could you maybe share, thank you for all of that. Could you maybe share, I know that this is an ongoing project and that, the data you're still reviewing and are coming to some conclusions and findings. What are some of the questions that you ask, and what are some of maybe, initially some of the surprising responses that you're seeing from Jewish people all over the world who are participating in this research?
Good question. So I haven't gotten so much into the, I'm looking more on the, I'm starting off with the quantitative data. I haven't yet gotten into the, other than the interviews I've done myself, I haven't gotten into the rich accounts that people have been giving. I've been blessed to have a number of committed research assistants. And I should also shout out the Source Research Foundation and the American Psychological Association for supporting some of my work while I've already interrupted myself. The question was, what are the things that I'm sorry.
What are you asking people, and what are some
Yeah,
surprising things that you're finding?
sure. So one of the things that I'm most interested in my research is how people find um, security, find feelings of safety in their life when they haven't had that growing up. And so we've been asking people about their experiences of their own parents,
Mm,
um, and um, their relationships now in adulthood. To sort of examine if people um, grew up without a solid resource of caring, believing that they're intrinsically worthwhile and lovable, that they are capable and competent. Can people discover um, uh, those gifts, those needs, through a spiritual experience? Normally, before psychedelics, you can't. How can you study that experimentally? Because you can't manipulate, you can't predict who's going to have a spiritual experience and discover those things, those resources. But with psychedelics, you can look at, or we are looking at, to what degree the psychedelic experience, whether the mystical component or emotional breakthrough, the experience of a sentient being present during the psychedelic experience, whether that can attenuate, right? Normally, insensitive care, if you come from a home where you've been deprived your basic emotional needs, we would expect that in adulthood, you would likewise have all types of insecurities, right? And you develop all types of maladaptive strategies around navigating that distress that would complicate your experiences being in a relationship, right? But so we've been looking at to what degrees all aspects of the psychedelic experience can disrupt that link.
mm. Well, you've said quite a number of really interesting things, but something that I'm uh, surprised by, and maybe people who are listening also, when talking about Jewish psychedelic experience, and you're trying to understand through uh, direct uh, narrative and also qualitative and quantitative data about people's experiences with psychedelics. But the thing that you started with was talking about people's attachment to their caregivers at the
Mhm.
early stages of their life, not what maybe I would have thought was, tell me about your Jewish journey, tell me about your Jewish practice, tell me about your sense of Jewishness of yourself, but something much further back than this. And I was wondering, maybe in order to go ahead, could you talk a little bit about what attachment theory is, and um, how does that actually work in your own research and your desires for both a Jewish and psychedelic research?
Sure. So I don't want to bury the lead, so I'll say the bottom line up front and then unpack it.
Sure. Yeah.
I am interested in the things that people label spiritual or religious, but what I'm really interested in is the mental, emotional, behavioral things that underlie those things, whether people label it spiritual or, whether the individual calls it spiritual or not, right?
Hmm.
Um, so when I think about religious or spiritual, I'm sorry, I don't want to get too distracted because you asked about attachment. So, so, so attachment's one of the most enduring, influential theories in all of psychology. Um, it was originally formulated to explain how infants develop in the context of their caregiving environments, the early formative relationships. And then later it was extended and expanded to, as John Bowlby said, from the cradle to the grave, to look at all phases of human development as unfolding in the context of how do I experience myself in relation to the world around me, right? At its core, attachment theory is about the ways that we feel in threatening situations or distressing feelings, whether it's anxiety or vulnerability. and how those feelings move us to seek comfort, whether it's like seeking closeness to people who can provide us with care or support, attachment figures, we call the safe haven function of attachment, as well as people who can give us feelings of resilience and strength to explore and discover the world around us, that we call the secure base function. And it's not just that we can find security not just in other people and attachment figures. Obviously, as we develop, as we grow, we find sources of security in our religious beliefs and our community, more symbolic ways of feeling safe and secure. When we're adults, we don't rely on our parents to soothe us, and our Motzet's pacifier. Yeah. Been in Israel about 12 years also. So as long as we're preoccupied by those threats and dangers, whether real or imagined, we need to devote our energy and attention to managing those feelings, right? We're focused inward. But to the extent that we can feel safe and draw on our inner resources to cope, then we also have better contact with our ability to thrive, with their creativity. And we can lift our gaze to, really explore the world around us, whether it's, growth in our career or, travel, or, all types of things that make life not just tolerable or manageable, but rich.
So what would you say then?
And so in religion also, right?
Yeah.
So I've had the privilege of working with Mario Mikulincer, who's expanded attachment theory to look at adulthood, and Per Granqvist, who wrote the book on attachment theory and religion, about how we experience God, in a way that often corresponds to the models that we've had, right? If I've had a loving pair of parents, then I can similarly, experience God the same way if I come from a religious background, right? But also that, even in the absence of, or through religious ritual, that I can just, or through community, that I can find a source of security, even if I didn't have, and the converse would be that I could, God forbid, experience God as harmful, punitive, vengeful, if those were the models that I had growing up, or if I encountered some sort of crisis that wasn't properly unpacked and worked through. Yeah, I'm sorry, did I land back at home plate?
Yeah, well, what I wanted to ask is, what it sounds like is that the research that you are, the background that you have in attachment theory is helping you further understand the roles of parents, authority figures, teachers, but also religious ritual, things like you've mentioned, like safe haven and secure base, that not only in people, but also in practices and in norms. And this, of course, can exist for people who don't identify as religious or as spiritual. So just to kind of, you're laying out that that landscape. How does that actually then factor up into psychedelic experience? Where are people be able to find these things in their psychedelic experiences and then reflect them back to you in something like the Narratives Project?
Would an example be helpful in this regard?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So, so I remember one particular participant didn't come from a very religious background, and they weren't particularly successful in life, and they weren't particularly close with their family, and they became depressed and even suicidal. They bought a dog, like a therapy dog. Excuse me. A therapy dog to help them cope with some of the things that they were going through. And then unfortunately the dog was killed in a violent, really. And then sort of as a last resort, and I'm not advocating, the people, I don't want to be, maybe I should mention this off the top. I don't want to advocate that people use psychedelics in an unsupported, uncontrolled environment. And certainly, people should consult a qualified mental health professional. But, as a sort of last resort, this person, decided to try psilocybin mushrooms, and they, after encountering some initial nausea, they laid down and they had this vision of being in like a cold, dark, damp cave. And then all of a sudden the cave filling with this like warm light, and hearing a voice saying, and what would the world be like without, if you were to remove yourself from it? They said it in a much more poetic, but they attributed that voice to God. It's a longer conversation to what degree we can look at these experiences as having, ontologically, valid foundation, right, for building religious, for normative religious practice. But the person came out of this experience with a fundamental feeling that they were, that their space in the world was important, was valuable. They didn't become super religious, but they, in small ways, they became involved in their community, in some social justice things and some, charity projects. And they, I think I interviewed them 5 years after their experience, and they haven't tried psychedelics again, and they haven't become religious, but, they had this core experience of feeling loved and feeling worthwhile. And I think that's what I'm trying to get at when I say I'm less interested in the surface area. I mean, I am interested in the surface of religion, but, I think it's rather intuitive that, more than mental health is going to be a result of how often you go to shul, or how often you, study Torah. It's going to be more a consequence of, how do you experience the God that you're praying to, right? More than the frequency of prayer is what is prayer like for you, and more than how often you're engaging with your community, how to what degree is your community a source of safe haven, secure base for you.
I can imagine that. Yeah, please.
No, and so attachment for me helps me organize. There's attachment has a whole program of also social neuroscience work behind it. So this is and for psychedelics as well. Psychedelics act on the same, they act on the serotonin system in the same way that attachment processes are active in how people learn what situations are threatening or dangerous, and what people and places are safe, right? So for me, it's a very useful framework for defining what are all of these underlying things that come together that we call religious and spiritual, right? The basic feelings of safety and love that come to the fore in all types of cultural ways that we then label as spiritual and religious, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot, actually, of a talk that I heard from maybe 2017, but earlier, by Bob Jesse, well-known founder of the Council of Spiritual Practice and a major advocate for integrating psychedelics into medicine and beyond, about how the findings of psilocybin research could help us understand the reconstruction of religion and the potential for thinking about religious experience as having many more broad factors than just the direct experience of divinity in your face and in your body, but being made up of this multiple lattice work of all of these things that you're talking about that bring a sense of safety, of the ability to be vulnerable, that in order to be open to what spirit has available for us, that one needs to be able to feel a deep amount of comfort and safety in the, not only in the setting, but also in the liturgy and also in the physical space, the people who are supposedly in charge, to
Mhm.
allow this to happen. And we know that that is certainly the case in better outcomes for psychedelic therapy and psychedelic use in general. The feeling of safety and vulnerability allows for the journeyer to open up that much more deeply. I want to close our conversation today by wondering where you're hoping all of this may lead you, both personally and professionally. Where is this work taking you right
Wow.
now?
That's a great question. Um, so first of all, I will note, because I think it's important. I haven't myself had the opportunity to try psychedelics. It's important for me that if I do, it's in a legal therapeutic setting. Um, but where is this all going? Um, oh, that's such a good question. Um, I'm not. I am a little nervous um, for how these, because we're not just talking about therapies, right? We're talking about all types of usage. I am nervous about how um, um, people are going to be encountering these substances. Um, if we don't provide the requisite support. I'll say I haven't really spoken so much with my rabbinic hat on, but I do feel like it's our duty from a Jewish perspective to, um, not only explore novel ways of growing spiritually, but also, to develop novel treatments for medical conditions that we don't yet have, perfect solutions for. And so it's with that spirit that I'm conducting this work to try to um, um, develop evidence-based ways of implementing psychedelic therapy in a responsible, meaningful way. Um, I do I do cringe a little bit when I hear the word psychedelic renaissance, because while it's true that there's so much research being done and so much our society is changing in a lot of ways around it, I think we shouldn't delude ourselves into thinking that there are no risks, involved in psychedelic use. And also some of the I talked about implementation. I worry that sometimes if the research shows that the people who can benefit the most from psychedelics are people who are already relatively stable, then that wouldn't really be moving the needle for us. Or if society, doesn't, the way that some of the pharmaceutical companies are developing their patents in ways, whatever, this getting off on a, I think that, where is this all going? I think that as people, we need to take the challenge that psychedelics are presenting us with, which is, how do we grapple with uncertainty? How do we allow ourselves to be vulnerable? How do we, encounter the whole spectrum of emotional states, and how do we choose sort of valuable ways of living, that don't always sorry to go. You were talking about how sometimes religious structures make it difficult, right? So I think that if we can learn anything from psychedelics, it's how to relate to things that are challenging. I don't think the answer that I'm sorry, I'm rambling a little bit. I'm not sure where this is going. I'm gonna return to my original statement, which is that I am in this space as a devoted, scientist, clinician, rabbi, to seek out evidence-based ways of improving people's condition in a way that's meaningful for them and their families and for society at large. Period.
Right.
No
Period.
semicolon.
Well, Rabbi Aaron Cherniak, soon to be doctor, we appreciate all of your work, all of your sharing, and all of your openness with our larger community. Thanks for being in conversation with me today.
Thank you for having me. And again, thank you so much for the work that you're doing and the encouragement that you provided me in the early days of my doctorate. Thank you very much.
And much more to come. Thank you.